There we go. So thanks for joining us today. My name's Taylor Battistella and I'm from Boomerang Labs. And a big welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time and also those of you who are regulars and also in attendance today. So thanks for coming. Today, we're really excited to explore more about AI-powered innovations that are redefining product reuse. And we're joined by a great panel and they're leading the way in this space. And I'm really looking forward to diving into their experiences, insights, and the opportunities that they see ahead. Before we do get into the webinar though, I'd like to take this moment to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which we all work and live today, extending our respects to elders past, present and emerging. In my case, I'm in Melbourne and I'm working on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. So please just take a moment to write in the chat and acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from where you're dialing in today. It's always great to see such a national audience on these calls. So a little bit about us. We're Australia's first circular economy accelerator, and we work with startups and innovators from the early stages of their businesses, where they're just working on an idea, all the way up to late stage startups who are looking to commercialize across all sectors and industries and see how that we can implement the circular economy into the core of their businesses instead of just as a little add-on, which so many businesses are trying to just do today. And this here is a little overview of how we see our programs. For us, the events are a really important aspect of Boomerang Labs because it's a great way to build our community and it's how we keep people engaged and interested in the startup space. We don't just need the startups, but we also need the customers and the people who are going to help drive the change. So that's it from me. Before I do introduce the speakers, I do just want to acknowledge our upcoming webinar, which I am quite excited about. We're going to have a really good expert panel for that. So I'll post a link to that in the chat shortly. But yeah, I'll hand it off to Simon, who's just going to give a quick introduction to himself before he hands it over to Dan Ling and we get started. So thank you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Simon Karlowski, formerly CEO of Mandalay Technologies, but now as from our acquisition, I am the Director of Business Development for Asia Pacific. And I spend my days talking principally to local governments or waste companies about how they can utilize technology to improve the outcomes in servicing their customers, whether it be the community or, you know, their commercial facilities.
Thanks, Simon. Hand it over to Dan Ling.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dan Ling, Chief Strategist and Creative Director at Ricoh Digital. I will just dive into our presentation and then Simon will follow after in his aspect of knowledge. So I'm just going to share.
And just while Dan Ling is getting set up, everyone, feel free to write any questions that you have during the session in the chat. And then as each speaker finishes and at the end of the session, we'll have an opportunity for questions.
Can you see it, the screen properly?
Perfect.
Okay, amazing. So today we're going to talk about how we can use AI to bridge the gap between people's intentions and their actions in the circular economy. We've identified 3 key levers that AI can pull to drive behavioral change. And I'll show you how these tools can help accelerate the progress to circularity. So a little bit about us. At Ricoh Digital, we help purpose-led businesses and government organizations build brands and scale digital marketing backed by research, strategy, and AI. With over 15 years of experiences, we understand the unique challenges when it comes to sustainability and behavioral change. And so now with AI dominating every industry, we've been able to quickly pivot and come up with new tools to enable the work that we've been doing for our clients. So a little bit about myself, I lead our strategy and creative direction. So in terms of AI, I was training with IMIT in 2019 with their AI strategy, and I have since gained deep understanding of the space from client work and our own product development. So I also use multiple large language models for different purposes, including the Chinese model, because I'm Chinese, DeepSeek, which has its own quirk as well. And in terms of the circular economy, I founded a refill delivery service that tackled plastic waste, servicing over 500 customers in Sydney CBD and eastern suburbs. And apart from that, we also work with a range of clients focusing on circularity and sustainable communication. So I had Hope, unfortunately, he's not able to join us today because he's unwell, but currently he's been building our own agentic model as well. Finally, we are also supported by our network of AI developers and partners, include AI developers from Duke University and Boston University. And we also collaborate with our tech partner who has access to some of the most amazing developers and AI engineers in the country. So why behavioral change? I believe that when we talk about circularity, it's very much about behavioral change also at the end when we take this thing to the customers, whoever it is, whether it's B2B or B2C. However, circularity faces a major challenge. There is this intention action gap. So in our recent research we conducted for a client, everybody who we interviewed, even the green warriors, they were so concerned about waste and all their carbon emissions, but many weren't able to take action. And it is actually not a lack of care in these people, but a behavioral barrier. So I believe that AI can be used to close this gap, if it's not all, but at least minimize this gap and enable positive behavioral change. So we identify 3 distinctive AI levers. The first is the barrier lever, using AI to make it easy for people to adopt new behavior. And the second is the journey lever, where we use AI to analyze behaviors and uncover deep-seated drivers. And finally is the creative lever, which we use AI for team-wide rapid testing and iteration. So with the barrier lever, it's about using AI to make things easy. So people will always default to the path of the least resistance. And so we first map the process to find the points of friction. And then we ask ourselves, is this a problem for logic or for AI? Because many solutions can already be built just with logic or simple automation. So we don't necessarily need to go into AI. However, for more complex problems, we use AI to understand the why behind the friction and build the tools to ease it. So one great example is our work with Radish Events, a sustainable catering company. So their problems was this tedious manual process of getting all the input, which is everything they buy at their for their business, to track their food use and also waste. So they have this huge motivation, a beautiful one, but there's not enough time or capacity to address it. So we use AI to build a targeted solution, a web app with AI-powered image recognition that instantly capture the data from the receipt. So you will be looking at, all these carrots, a bunch of carrots, like how heavy it is versus a chicken, how heavy it is. So all of these, we are able to leverage the knowledge already embedded in Gemini, and then we are able to pick up all of this content and turn it into data for the client. And on top of that is the client will basically go into the data and verify whether they are correct or not until it's sort of become more accurate at the end. So this solution removed the friction of manual data entry, making it easy for the team to measure their food efficiency and real impact. So with our two AI developers from Boston University, we developed a minimum viable product that achieved 90% accuracy in just 4 weeks. The second lever is about understanding the user journey. And behavioral change is a journey, and AI can act as a partner in this deep-seated behavioral analysis. So we use AI to automate part of the qualitative data collection process from interviews and workshops. But also with our strategies, the AI then analyze the data to identify behavioral themes, patterns, emotional drivers, and the recurring points of friction. So this allowed us to propose different scenarios for intervention and build a communication strategy grounded in data. In our work on projects like, for example, Ipoh's reusable lunchbox, which we have been doing for a while now this year. Ipoh is a well-known Malaysian restaurant in Sydney. And so they're looking at launching their reusable lunchbox for their catering, but also their customers. And so we use another project as well for clients. So that's when we use AI for 3 key processes, especially when budget requires a more agile approach. Usually we will be basically tagging all the coding and tagging all the interview data. But in some cases, we actually start to use AI for the whole process. And we try to have the sort of human input to monitor it, to make sure that everything is as accurate as possible. And so first of all, we use AI for discovery. And so recently, ChatGPT just launched a web crawling function as sort of like an agentic AI kind of model. And so we were able to use that function to crawl relevant competitors' websites to get all their pricing and their market positioning. And then we sort of double check it with our client, and that surprisingly achieved 100% accuracy. And then we also use AI for qualitative analysis. So with, for example, with custom GPT, we analyze the interview data and to build a empathy map and uncovering the core pains, hidden drivers for the target audience. And I want to mention that in terms of inputting the data into our custom GPT, we make sure that the link is not shared publicly, and we make sure only the selected sort of data is anonymous, and so making sure that no one is this data privacy is safe. And finally, we also use AI for strategic modeling, generating different hypothesis model to inform our communication strategy. This brings us to our core philosophy. I believe that it is a human and AI collaboration. And so the process would always start with the human input, our real empathy versus the artificial empathy from AI, our experience, knowledge, wisdom, our face-to-face data collection, for example, interviews, and also our critical thinking. While with AI, then it generates possibilities from data modeling to hypothesis generations to creative variations. And the most beautiful thing is that we actually, for example, with agentic AI, we are able to input all this specialized knowledge for it to train it to become basically focusing on that particular segment of functions. But the final and most critical step is human evaluation and decision making, where we apply our critical thinking and analysis backed by data and all the things that created from our collaboration. So the final lever is all about execution in our point of view. And we are transforming the creative process from a bottleneck into a collaborative tool for the entire team. So these days, for each project, we build a custom GPT loaded with all the information needed, for example, like brand strategy And we actually built the brand strategy with AI and to come to it to the final edition, and then we put it into the library. And then with also like user personas, and in this case, for example, circular knowledge in the different industries. And this basically allows everyone, including our junior team members, they are able to instantly generate creative ideas that speak directly to the emotional and the behavioral drivers that we identify throughout the journey. And so this basically makes things a lot faster and easier, especially when it comes to testing. And that means like we can create different concepts in the time that we might be able to just create a few. So that gives a lot of power and agency to the team members as well. So a perfect example is of all of these levers in action is our Recall Live conference, which was also supported by Boomerang Labs. The challenge was to create a large-scale, impactful event for a niche community of circular and purpose-led businesses within 7 weeks. So we leverage AI as a strategic partner to curate the content, the speakers, to plan the event, to build the team, and come up with marketing strategies and creatives. And then the final result is we brought together almost 200 people on a rainy day to Uluru, including leaders in the circular economy, to learn and collaborate together. So all of these were completed in 7 weeks with a very lean team of junior designers and strategists and myself. And the conference proved that with an intentional tech-enabled strategy, we can overcome resource constraints, especially in the sort of smaller project or like smaller startup kind of scale, to build a vibrant and engaged community for circularity. And we cannot talk about AI without talking about the cost of AI. So in the next few slides, I will share a little bit about the environmental impact of AI. In terms of carbon emissions, the standard Google search is 0.2 CO2, while compared to a text AI query, it will be 10 times more than Google search. And with AI image generation, we're looking at about 35, which is sort of like double the email with attachment. But video, it's costing so much. It's about 200 CO2. And you can see the long bar here. And according to MIT Technology Review, creating a 5-second AI video is like running a microwave for an hour. So we propose that purpose-led businesses, circular businesses should be able to use AI more consciously. And we've included a checklist on our website if you're interested. But we believe also being able to offset carbon costs with bigger measurable impact. And in our case, for example, with Radish Event, our AI tool has helped the team to reduce the hours that they would otherwise put into tracking the data, inputting the data, rather than allocating their time more wisely into achieving their sustainable goal. And also advocates for transparency and ethics. This is all about sharing the knowledge. And this is what I believe that we should, with great power, we also comes with great responsibility. And this is what I'm here for. And ultimately, I believe that we should just continue to support climate action, continue to advocate for awareness, and do the amazing work that we do. At Recall, our goal is not just about improving our efficiency, but also enhance our accuracy and diversity of our thinking and strategy for our clients and the broader circular and purpose-led community. So we are collaborating with our tech partner to build an agentic AI system for our own workflow. And in this system, we imagine that the different AI agents can specialize in a variety of knowledge areas, such as behavioral science, circular economy, brand communication, and all of these little agents can basically communicate and talk to each other and build that system that enable our process to be much more efficient, but also accurate. And I believe that potentially that model can be applied to many other either small businesses, government, or enterprise level. So lastly, the AI world is changing so rapidly, but this is how we are currently using AI for strategic and creative impact in the circular space. So if you would like to learn more, I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter. You can scan the QR code here. You can also visit our website to learn more about the cost of AI and our checklist. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dan Ling. That stat about the microwave is amazing. It's a whole new webinar in itself and more, I think. Saw a few stunned faces there. No, that's great. So if anyone has any questions for Dan Ling, chuck them in the chat, and then we'll hand it over to Simon now, and then we'll revisit any of those questions in a bit more of an open forum at the end. So thanks, Dan Ling. Good stuff. Simon, there you go.
A bit big. I'll just share my presentation. Part of being part of a global company, you now realize that you can't just do things on the fly. So I've just got a couple of slides, and then I'm really just going to talk to the problem and the opportunity, if that makes sense. So first of all, a little bit about, as now we're part of the AMCS group. So if you give a bit of context, sort of globally, AMCS, they work across 37 countries. They've got about nearly 2,000 staff now, so growing quite rapidly. And they work across the whole of the sustainability space as we realise that this linear world that we live in, as it moves to a circular world, there's a huge requirement on software technologies to support efficient operations. And the thing I think I would say, and the challenge facing the industry of waste and recycling, and then as we move into circular economy, one of the biggest challenges that I see is that the reality is that particularly governments and even the private sector, they have the challenge of adopting new practices as well as having to maintain the status quo. So you've got a council that has to provide a service and pick up all of the bins on time to 99.9 something percent, you know, efficiency and repetitive standard of quality. And then at the same time, they're expected to adopt and implement all these new product stewardship or circular economy practices. And so it's incredibly difficult. For us in Australia, if you think about AMCS as a business in Australia, the best way to think about it is that over a third of the waste facilities, be it transfer stations, landfills, organic facilities, or other sort of community recycling centres, more than a third of those run our software technology, and then more than a third of the vehicles, the commercial vehicles that are collecting waste, either be it from commercial, industrial, or municipal business, they also run our software technology. So if you think about it in a linear world, as you imagine, if you look at the left-hand diagram there, and this is probably what I'll talk to a lot, you've got the generation of materials that is excess to someone's immediate needs, which they call waste. And then you've got essentially trucks or vehicles that collect them, and then they take them to facilities for processing in one form or another. And so we're a really heavy and significant part of that supply chain. And then obviously we're at the same time trying to support organisations as they evolve into this circular world. I think AMCS has been particularly successful at utilising AI, and Dan Ling, she talked about it, particularly in the relationship to how cameras work at detecting the attributes around materials, if I do it in a more generic term. And so AMCS, for some time now, has had AI being utilised on board the trucks that do commingled recycling, and they're detecting contamination in those bins as they're being dropped into the hopper of a commingled recycling. So if you think and I'll come back to this story quite a lot, but if you think about it, there's often value in the recycling bin, actually more than people realize, but that value diminishes as soon as you've got contamination. So if you have a recycling bin that's full of clean materials, then it's worth sometimes quite a lot, but it's start to drop contamination into that bin, and residents don't necessarily understand what they're doing, or sometimes they don't care. So this AI technology sits on leveraging camera technology, and it can give feedback loop to councils to identify very precisely the contamination in commingled recycling. Now, and this is where I guess some of the challenges then fall, is then it then falls into two other areas that have to be able to be changed to support that, is then how do you then give that feedback to the customer, so the person who's doing the behaviour in the first place, and then what sort of policy or program change is there to support that. So it's one thing to be able to detect the contamination or the behaviour, but it's another thing altogether to then be able to then say, okay, how do we leverage that technology into perhaps changing the policy or changing the program or having a penalty or having a reward for the right behaviour. There's all these sorts of, I guess, often when we see technology and it supports in behaviour change, then you need to have education as part of it, the technology itself, and then you need to have, let's call it the policy and reinforcement framework to support what you're trying to get in terms of the behaviour change. So clients see the technology themselves and go, oh, okay, I need to do this, but they need to think about the whole process if they want to actually affect an outcome. So we've been doing it for quite some time, and I did want to just mention, and then obviously focus on the subject, which is around redefining reuse. But, you know, some other things that we've started to look at from an R&D point of view. From a facility point of view, I can very much see a time, if you think about facilities and you've got a high volume of commercial, you know, trucks coming through them, I could foresee a time, the technology exists now, whereby you're using AI to detect the composition of loads. So i.e. if you've got C&D waste and you want to detect asbestos within those for contamination, I can see that that's very achievable, and being a realistic proposition in terms of how we sort of screen for composition of waste through facilities in a large scale. And to give you an idea, AMCS, we process at a facility level nearly 50 million tonnes of waste on behalf of our customers in Australia. So we're at the sort of the other end of the spectrum in terms of dealing with this linear world. So if you think of the total volume of waste in Australia, then, you know, often we're handling it more than once in the supply chain, but it's a huge volume of waste that our sort of software is processing. So an idea that I can see, as I said, very much the composition. I also suspect that that'll lead to new charging models where you might even be able to charge based upon the calorific value or the carbon, you know, impact of that particular load. So I sort of see those sorts of AI being able to unlock new intelligence about the way customers are incentivized or driven around the behavior that they might do at a facility level. And then, you know, even to give you an example, the other day I was with a council. So illegal dumping is a huge issue in this country. I would say I don't have data on this collectively, but through, you know, we work with 130 odd councils, so I've got a reasonable idea of it. And I would say that the collective cost of illegal dumping in this country would easily be, you know, north of 300 or 400 million a year per annum. And so you've got councils that have got an annual budget of $4 million on illegal dumping. And I was like, well, surely you'd be able to run some sort of AI software either through cameras or through mapping software, because if you look at the story of tyres, which is a common example of illegal dumping, then they've got to come from somewhere in the first place. It's not an accident. They didn't just appear. That person's probably had them sitting in the yard or sitting in their business yard for some time, and then they disappear from one location and then appear in another location. And those networks of illegal dumping are becoming, you know, sometimes it's accidental or reactive, but a lot of the time there's a level of sophistication where even you've got sort of essentially sentries. So my apologies, watch people on particular roundabouts who are watching for enforcement. And so then if they see enforcement vehicles coming, then they'll notify the people that are actually doing the illegal dumping at another location. So AI can be used. My example there is that when we think about this problem of waste into circular, AI is not necessarily just the core problem, but it might be able to leverage other technologies that are supporting behavior in some form, but being able to reuse the purpose of the technology towards a circular outcome. So jumping onto then I guess the topic I was asked to talk about, which is around redefining reuse. And I'm going to make it very personal because I buy all my cleaning products from what I'd call a premium environmental cleaning company, and I buy them all in bulk. And for the life of me, I can't get them to take those containers back, even though I just find it mad. So I've got these 15-litre reusable containers, and so every few months or so, and with small kids in a busy household, we have a lot of laundry liquid. So every few months I'm ended up driving my car back to take these containers back to this manufacturing facility of cleaning products. And so I'll talk to this story a lot when I think about the problem facing startups and businesses trying to solve this space. So I come up with an equation from which is pretty loose, but I think it's an easy way to frame the problem. That really waste is really the inverse of waste when you want to look at circular is having enough volume plus it's clean enough and it's no longer waste. So if I have one bottle on its own and it's dirty, it's waste. If I have 10 million of them, or better still, I have 10 million per annum, then I can do something with that and turn that into a material. And I would say that almost works for anything. So for governments in the room, waste is about having not much and having it mixed and dirty, then it's waste, basically. So my simple calculation is if you have enough volume, plus it's clean enough, then it can be circular at a cost divided by the logistics. So what is required to aggregate those materials into a location in order to utilize them? And it's not just doing it once, but actually doing it on a repetitive basis. So if I go back to the example with the cleaning products, then you're like, okay, how does that company, if it was looking at instituting a redefining reuse scenario, how does it leverage AI to understand its customers better? Because it probably already has delivery advices, database of where stuff's going, and then admittedly they sell a lot through retailers. So how do they leverage AI much more efficiently to actually build a relationship with a customer? Because if you look at the example that I talked to, waste starts with a generator, and you've actually got to access the generator and start to affect their behavior. And I could give you, hundreds of examples in my story, right? I'm often carrying around container deposit schemes in my car, finding a facility. I'm trying to figure out what to do with batteries. There's any number of products that I'm sort of sitting with part way going, how do I reuse these? There's a transfer station near an airport that I travel out of, but I've got apprehension about whether it'll take certain things or how long it will take to go through that facility, yet I go in and out of that airport all the time. So in terms of for companies or organizations or individuals looking at facilitating that reuse, I think one of the biggest leaps is then saying, okay, cool, how do I use AI to really know where my product is based upon the relationship to the brand and how it fits or the consumption of the product? Because I think that's really taking that customer on that journey and getting them engaged in that process is critical. And so the last thing I'd say is that the other thing that I think AI can really help with around redefining reuse is that you, as an entity or an organization that's participating in that, you have to think about your relationship relative to the main flow of material. And so how do you, utilizing technology particularly, how do you then demonstrate value back to the participants in that existing technology? So you've got startups where they're doing on-demand services and then leveraging, third-party vehicles for some of that collection and transport. Or how do you tell councils or the number of people participating in your reuse scheme? Because that material, so for me, let's just, for argument's sake, if I'm diverting 30 small bottles of cleaning products out of my bin every quarter because I'm buying in bulk and then sending back to the manufacturer, then I'm probably having a benefit to the council in weight terms of probably whatever the value of weight is by $200 to $300 a ton. Yet that council that I participate in has no visibility in that and no means of supporting that behaviour. And so, for the market in general, the challenge is that you've got the existing entrenched waste and recycling market has a high cost on landfill, high cost in providing service, and that cost is all passed on to the customer either through fees and charges or through a waste surcharge. And so to be able to uncouple that supply chain and start to move material back in to allow manufacturers or brands to really reuse at scale, then you're like, well, how do I use that intelligence of the generation of materials and the flow to give value back to the other participants so that they can actually support my success and support the behavior of consumers further? And then I'll leave on that point and then sort of start to go to questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Simon. All right. Opening up the floor now. We can all see each other. Feel free to turn your cameras on. I saw there were a couple of questions in the chat earlier, but they've been answered. So happy for Danley and Eddie to give some more context on that, or anyone else in the room to ask any questions directly. Otherwise, I can get us started. Did you have anything further that you wanted to add to your responses, Danley?
Hello, thanks so much, Simon. It's so insightful. Yeah, in terms of the questions, yeah, I think the first one, how to measure your CO2 and water footprint as an AI company. I'm actually interested in knowing Simon's thoughts, because from our end, out of all this research that we've done, it's just at the moment it's impossible to measure. If you're using a sort of an offshore kind of other people's data center, how do you? Yeah, what's your view on that?
Yeah. I was actually weirdly enough, I actually have a whole list of ideas of things to think about. And that's on the list, strangely enough. If you look at the AI world, and this is going to become particularly complex, so I'm answering it by not answering it, so I apologize. But if you look at it, so what's happening at the moment is you've got the big AI vendors, right? And if you look at the stats, by 2030, AI as source of power consumption will be 40% of total power consumption in the US. So forget about all the historic power consumptions, and I think we won't get into politics around it, but the reality is that AI is going to consume infinitely more power than anyone even realizes, and we're only at the start of that journey, so we've got no idea about what's to come. So the second thing that's happening now is, because of the cost of cloud computing and the cost of AI, AWS and Microsoft Azure are the two primary cloud providers. They're running at about 85% GP. So big companies and organizations are actually going, this is actually going to be really expensive, as you pointed out, as you start to use it. So what you're seeing is you're going to actually see all these small clusters of AI be built on microcomputers and microservers and micro networks. So organizations are actually going to be utilizing a whole myriad of AI and cloud and internal cloud, and so their technology stack is going to be very, very complex in order to both cost, but also then you look at the carbon impacts of that and how do you measure the total footprint of the behavior, then it's a very complex problem. So I'm sort of answering it by saying it's not an easy thing to answer, because it's not like you go and buy all of your services from DeepSeek or from ChatGPT or from any of them. Successful execution on this will actually end up with a myriad of solutions, and then you've got to think about your organizational what's the word? You can't actually rely upon running your business on all those systems anyway. So then, what's your data management, and where do you manage all of that, and how do you retain all that information? And then, so trying to provide, so we have a product which I honestly don't know a lot about yet, which is around ESG reporting, and what we're finding is that the complexity of reporting and requirements for organizations is growing astronomically, because business is becoming more complex and more agile, yet they're still expected to report on their overall, sustainability, drivers and impacts and their carbon footprint. So I would say it's a very difficult thing to answer.
Something I was wondering is there any products or industries in particular that you guys think would be, or like sort of see as more of the low-hanging fruit where you can improve that capture of reusing
Yep.
particular, yeah.
Well, yeah. So where I've thought about it is, like, if you look at the example that I talk about with cleaning products, I've lost all relationship to price because I just want to not create small containers that I'm throwing in the bin all the time. So in our household, at every wash point, laundry, bath gel, hand wash, we all have like a glass bottle, has a pump, and I spend my nights refilling them once a week or whatever. So elasticity to price is one. Your relationship to price is one. So products whereby the consumer will build a brand value around the product that's greater than and I'm going to get my terminology wrong, but I think, so where your value in the brand is greater than the value of the product and you're not worried about the packaging, then your ability to move to a reuse model, I think, is much higher than people realise. So I looked at Darling's trial that they did in the eastern suburbs in Sydney. If I, personally, I've got a bit more discretion on my, expenditure than most, but, I would buy my dairy that way. I'd buy my, yogurt, cheeses. I hate having to buy packaging in the first place. But the challenge comes is then what's that intelligent, easy way? Because we've been conditioned the convenience of just throwing stuff in the bin. So what's a method for the reuse of containers such that I'm not carrying messy containers in my car or my house or whatever for periods of time? So yeah, that would be my, I think, like cosmetics, there's actually, quite a substantial range of products that's sitting in plastics that could go into reuse because their brand values align to the consumer. You've just got to build that model,
I think when we and thanks, Simon, for looking into my my startup as well. We've actually stopped it a couple of years ago because it was just really hard to scale. And people were responding to it so well, and we try to make it as easy as possible for people to adopt. And that is why it's really easy for them to get in, and they also get their reward. But like in terms of as a business to scale, it would just incredibly difficult because it's so localized.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was the just generically, what were the subject areas that you had to scale that were hard?
I think just like the cost on its own.
Of logistics? You mean when you say the cost of, is it the return process?
Not just that, but also like we were actually using glass containers,
Yep.
and we try to avoid the single-use plastic,
Yep.
or even like reusable plastic. And so that is already on its own 3 times more expensive than
Yeah.
a single plastic in terms of cost. And so basically the price will have to come from the consumers.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, so I often think about like if we were going to run it in this time of more AI prevalent, how would we be able to run it? Would that be actually change the whole story? But it
Yeah.
still does not change the actual kind of physical product, the cost
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah. I do
Yeah.
wonder, I even looked at working with someone around, I don't know if anyone's been through the IVF process, but I was with a friend who was going through it, and she was horrified at the amount of wasted materials that weren't really wasted. They were just excess to that round. And even that was a fascinating exercise to say, imagine the scale of the number of families going through IVF in Australia and the amount of waste coming out of that. And she had other things come up, so we didn't pursue it. But I was just looking at it going, it's the insane amount of waste that goes into certain products, and then identifying, okay, cool, yeah, how do you? As I said, I think the AI particularly can become intelligent around where are my customers, how do I get them back, how do I engage them in that process so they take, for want of a better term, more ownership. Because, reality consumer brands sort of are, but aren't really taking ownership of their packaging because they can avoid it. And so as consumers, the only thing we can do is vote with our money about where we spend our money, if that makes sense,
I feel like I'm also like to address the lower hanging fruit versus B2B versus B2C. I probably think that the B2B space is probably our lower hanging fruit.
Yeah.
That because there's this massive volume that we can tap into, and then it's really to kind of understand the whole user journey from the operator perspective, but also from the customer perspective, to see what are the sort of segments of the whole process where we can identify, where we can enable it with AI as well.
Yeah, thank you guys. That's interesting. Does anyone else? We've still got 10 minutes to go, so happy to field any more questions if there are any more. Otherwise, we can end the session early. So feel free to take yourself off mute and fire away. Otherwise, we'll finish it there. Feel like an auctioneer going once.
I've got a question back for the
Yeah.
audience. Is like, so if you had your perfect scenario, so if you had ultimate thing, forget about how it's done, what would you wish for it to be? So in relation to the subject we've defined or other things around circular, you're like, okay, cool. So there's a whole bunch of people employed, there's a whole bunch of people working on circularity. But what would be, for anyone to go, what would be an ideal end state? If that makes sense. Shouldn't be that hard. You should all have passionate answers.
So Priscilla's sent a message in the chat
Yep.
saying consumer educated on supply chains.
So I'll be a bit provocative here. So what? They're educated. What does that then mean?
I'll
Like,
just
what
put
is that?
myself on.
I've got a comment.
Yep.
Of a challenge that I have. I think that I will be confronting.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a background in design and advertising. I've run an advertising agency for 25 years, and it continues to run. And I've stepped away to investigate and research a potential idea I have, which I've been working on for 6 months, but keep changing my mind for many reasons. But I think one of the biggest issues or problems that I'll keep coming up against is the throwaway culture, and
Yep.
that is driven by social media in many ways. and it's very hard to to combat that in terms of many things like price, and convenience, and
Yep.
and the instant gratification culture that works with that, and the being a mum of 2 young adults, that whole generation of the throwaway culture. It's easy, right? So it's so easy to buy something, to replace something, to buy something that may not be of good quality, but is definitely easier and cheaper. And it's that culture. It's like the culture to want more. And I do think that's going to be the biggest challenge with anyone in this space is having to re-educate or educate or whatever it may be, the mass communication, the mass population that have this and is continuing to get worse, that attitude. I guess so. What I'm saying is, what I have worked in the AI space for some time as well, so I understand what that can do for any business. But I think that I guess what are the strategies and tools that can help us, anyone that's starting a business in this space or has a business in this space, to change all that, go back to those values.
I've got thoughts to that, Dan Ling, or others want to answer. Otherwise, I'm happy to answer. So first of all, Julie, it's a great question, and I do think about it a bit because ultimately, motivators tend to come from being intrinsic motivators in terms of. So I think ultimately, at a humanity level, it comes from your relationship with yourself and your relationship with your family and your community. And once you change that, then your values around what you do with your materials starts to change automatically, if that makes sense. So that human connectedness to world and environment, that's a tricky one. but that's really, as I joke, because I used to have a farm, a regenerative farm, and I used to joke, if I get anyone growing vegetables, then they'll change their relationship with everything, because it just changes you. I think so. To your point, I think, Julie, the systemic way of your point, how do you use technology and culture to almost move, reinvent what sort of convenience or cool or standards look like is possible. So leveraging the reasons about why we've got to where we are, leveraging them back, I think is definitely possible. And I think the reality is, and governments are facing this, and I'll sort of finish on this point, is that in metropolitan areas, waste at a single unit household level is probably around about $1,000 a household per annum. And it's going to go to $2,000 per household per annum per year over the next sort of 5 years, and for a unit, it'll obviously be less than that. And in regional areas, it's probably going from about $300, $350 a household up to about $700 or more. And so, I think what people don't realize is that, okay, well, actually at $1,000, it's costing me, what is it costing me, $20 a week for that bin. And then, okay, there is actually a cost on those things. And it's going to go higher. So unfortunately, I think it's local governments particularly have to find ways to educate and incentivize and engage people in that process, because what I was getting to before is that, you actually want a scenario whereby people aren't going, well, I don't need that bin, or I don't want to use that service because I'm conscious about my consumption. I've got enough brands that I can reuse stuff through that I don't need to put out a bin. And that's actually a real problem for government, because they've built the whole model on having bins. And so that's actually a difficult one for them to process if that actually happened. Does that make sense? So if you got 10,000 properties in a council and they all were very circular tomorrow, council would have an even bigger problem because they're like, oh, we've got a whole lot of empty bins. You know, we don't know what to do. You know, got to not be too provocative.
Thank you. Just mindful of time and mindful, Priscilla, did you want to just finish what you were saying and then perhaps we can start to wrap it up?
Thank you. No, I was just putting out thought of consumers being more educated in supply chains, not just supply chains of manufacturing, but also within the whole circularity of recycling. And having that education would make their pockets, not to say deeper, but their price elasticity to that product might be improved.
Yep.
Yeah, that was my point.
Thank you. We've got a lot of questions there in the chat now. Simon, Danley, I don't know if you want to quickly skim over them and address anything. Otherwise, we can call it there.
I'm just going through them. Problem for recycled customers, multitude different places and products to recycle.
I think like in terms of accessibility, like how can AI make things more accessible? I always feel there's this hype around technology and AI now that everybody almost like want to solve a problem with AI, but in fact, there's a lot of things that, like Simon was saying, it's our connection with the world and within ourselves. And so like I think when we approach a problem, it's always like looking into what are the really deep problems that we are facing and how can we solve it with or without AI. And in terms of like in these particular questions, the recycling is that I almost feel like when Simon was saying that the mattress people are dumping and then there is like surveillance camera looking at people, it feels like it should be more a forced intervention from the government, almost like to give them fine or something to be more, you know, because the people who are not recycling are actually the one who don't care almost. Like, for example, I live in Sydney in the sort of near the CBD, and people just go to the bin and chuck whatever in there. And it's not so much because they are the people who care, is that they don't care, they have no knowledge. And it feels like maybe there should be a different way to deal with different segments of people in terms of their behaviors as well.
Absolutely. I might, I reinforce that. And I wanted to share, just responding to Ben, James, sorry, how does that fit with compulsory reporting? So back when Julie Gillard implemented the carbon tax way back when, I can't remember, we built at the time a really advanced carbon reporting tool for waste companies, and we thought it was fantastic. And we never sold a license. We sold one license and the customer didn't use it, and then didn't sell another, and I didn't understand why. And then someone told me why. There's a big facility operator, and they said, oh, we have a consultant that builds a report to tell us how much customers owe us. We have a consultant that builds a report to tell the government how much we need to pay them, i.e. less. And then we have a model. We have a consultant that builds us a model to tell the customers what we're not going to give them back when it's repealed. And so the lesson, the story I share there was that unless there's transparency in that data, and this is where AI can help, and integrations and standardizations on the ease of reporting, then whilst ever it's being done manually, then the corporations will ultimately be modeling it to suit their own interest in some form. And I'm not trying to say that negatively. I would do the same if I was them. But, whenever we get this, I guess, the systems and the reporting and the ease of that process has to be taken out of manual input, because whenever it's manual, then you're going to get, misuse.
Maybe there should be an AI program to monitor AI's, all the compulsory reports. That would be amazing.
Yeah.
Nice. All right. That takes us 2 minutes over time. So lots of info this session. A lot of people saying thanks in the chat, and yeah, I'd like to extend that thanks to you, Danling and Simon, for all the insights and time and generosity of insights. They were really interesting. So yeah, great webinar. And if anyone does want to get in touch, please reach out and I can make an introduction following the session. So thanks everyone. Hope you have a great
Thank you,
week.
Danling.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. Really enjoyed it.